Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free at achievable.me. Use the code podcast if you want to save 10%. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Jeff Eisenberg, and Jeff, I'd love if you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Glad to be back. My name is Jeff Eisenberg. I'm from Long Island Test Prep, and I've been tutoring for the SATs, ACTs, GREs, LSATs, and other tests for over 30 years now.
Great. Yeah, and then let's dive into today's topic, which is common mistakes students make on the GRE. And I think with the view of the many test takers that you've worked with, what are the most consistent and common mistakes that people make?
Well, might not be what you meant, but I think the first one would be simply not taking a serious approach to studying, whether it's self-study and using a platform like Achievable and or working with a professional tutor who can guide them through the process. To take a more haphazard approach is setting yourself up for a tough time, or at the very
Hmm.
least, minimizing your upside, which is, of course, the last thing that one should be looking to do when preparing for anything, and most certainly when you're looking to get ready for a test that can bring so many benefits to you in terms of admission and
Hmm.
scholarships as well.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think just, yeah, what's like the number one mistake, maybe? Maybe that's a good way to start
Taking
this.
it at home. I because
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a particular, it started with COVID and the option to then take it at home with a proctor watching you on the computer, and that has become a permanent part of your options, and that exists for other graduate exams as well, the LSAT and the GMAT too. But I am adamantly, vehemently opposed to exercising that option. It's mostly because it places what I think is just a completely unnecessary burden on the student. You
Hmm.
are now responsible for proving on an ongoing basis that you're not cheating, that you are actually following the rules, all of the guidelines, and making sure your space is secure. As opposed
Hmm.
to if you go to a Prometric center, your job at that point is exactly what it should be: show up,
Hmm.
take the test, give it your best focus, and that's all you have to worry about. I,
And like, don't worry about it too much.
Right.
Yeah.
You just go, you show up, you follow the rules. If something goes wrong, you raise your hand, and there's someone who works there whose job it is to come over to you and help you solve that problem. If there's a technical issue, it's up to them. And there's a clear cut record of exactly what took place because it's all being run in the Prometric Center. I had one student,
Right.
it goes back to when it was first happening with COVID. A student texted me in a panic, understandably so. Oh my
Hmm.
God, my Wi Fi cut out. What do I do? And I couldn't give, and it hurts, as a tutor, as a teacher, it hurts to have to give an answer along the lines of, I'm really sorry. There's nothing I can do to help you here. You just have to contact ETS. And,
Right.
that's a miserable place for me as a tutor to say that. It's far worse for the student to have to hear that answer. And so,
Hmm.
just your recourse is almost nil if you're taking it at home.
Hmm.
And yes, although you can go on Reddit and see all kinds of tales of, well, yes, I would imagine percentage wise, and I lack data on this, but percentage wise, I'm sure the hiccups that take place are a small percentage. But
Hmm.
Still, should it happen, you're kind of out there on your own. But also, even if everything goes smoothly, as it does just so often, it does, I still like the idea that a student goes to take the test and that's your only job is to
Yes.
just
Well, I
perform
think it's like
maximally.
yeah, I think it's like you said, at the end of the day, it's kind of stepping into the arena and it should get you in the right mindset in
Yes.
a way that maybe doing something at home wouldn't.
Hmm.
It's also very much, yeah, just eliminating things to be worried about,
Yeah,
like removing test anxiety opportunities, I think is very important.
absolutely. And look, it's impossible to eliminate test anxiety entirely. It's not even, I would argue, it's not even desirable to do so. It, some of the energy that is created by a reasonable level of test anxiety can be channeled into your performance on the exam. But yeah, you don't want to
Mhm.
do things that kick it into overdrive. And also, just as a matter of focus, it's you show up at Prometric, you're told where to go, you're told, okay, that computer over there, right?
Mhm.
The whole thing is taken care of for you as opposed
Mhm.
to needing to secure your space and and have to worry about if there's anyone home. Hopefully you have, if you live with people, they will cooperate with you. But there's just it eliminates all of those issues if you just go to Prometric.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. Talk about some other common mistakes that you found. I'd love to do ones that are more like within the test.
Of course, yeah. But I do think the issue of where to take it is so important. I did want to make sure we got there. But of course,
Hmm.
exam, again, as a matter of focus, students sometimes will start worrying about if you have several letters in a row, let's say several instances where B is the answer in a row, and they start second guessing themselves. But there was a reason they chose
Hmm.
that particular answer. And so trusting yourself, trusting that your process led you to a particular answer becomes a
Hmm.
very important thing, because if you start second guessing, if you start trying to game out how many of a particular letter is appearing on the test, you're not even taking the exam anymore. You're onto a different task entirely. And so students will often drive themselves to distraction, and that most definitely will undermine them. When you look at the math, very often students on the quantitative comparison in particular, I find they will make the mistake of simply not trying a second or third set of numbers because you have that choice D, which I like to tell them stands for depends. It depends which numbers you're
Hmm.
using. Well, you must, unless you are able to recognize the concept at work. And if you do, and you're able to recognize instantly that, okay, this is D because of the nature of what it might be, or it must always be this, great. But if you need to plug in, if you need to try different options, then you must take the time to try enough options to know for sure that it's always A or it's always B or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I also just think that in general, there's just like your goal is to eliminate opportunities for
Sure.
mistakes, right?
Sure.
Like eliminate opportunities for failure. And I
Hmm.
think that makes a lot of sense as a big one.
Sure.
What do you think are like the common mistakes that cost students the most points, right? What do you think is the most expensive mistake, maybe?
On the vocabulary based questions, students make the
Mhm.
mistake of they see a word they don't know, and they, as a result, simply based on the fact that they don't recognize the word or don't know the definition, they're done with the choice. And that's not enough basis for eliminating a choice. It may be that
Yeah.
if you try the others that you know and none of them work, Well, you just eliminated the right choice. You just denied yourself points. And that is, it's almost an instinct that people want to blot out the memory of the word that they don't know. And so they cross it out. And so, given how vocabulary heavy the GRE is, that can be a very, very costly mistake.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would also say like timing is a big
Oh, for
one,
sure.
right? I think that getting maybe this is like more of a prep mistake, but I think a big one that I've seen a lot is that people don't take timed practice tests.
Sure.
So then when it's time for the real test, they're not ready for the time pressure.
Absolutely. They'll, to give themselves more room, and it comes from a good place, that they feel that, well, this will give me more time to really work every question. So they'll do untimed
Hmm.
sections. They'll do things like that. And there's nothing wrong with taking the pressure of the clock off once in a while for practice. But to your point, if you're not practicing it within the time constraints, along with everything else that goes into taking the test properly, yeah, you'll get down to test day, and all of a sudden you're facing a completely different circumstance, and you're not ready for it, and you
Hmm.
may have quite a few more questions left unanswered than you might have otherwise. Just learning how to use the tools built in, because after all, like all of the graduate exams now, it's online as well, and learning how and when to
Hmm.
mark for review, and just getting used to that idea that, oh, I have to go back and check which ones I marked for review. If you're not accustomed to the
Hmm.
timing and the mechanics of the program when you're taking the test, yeah, you're behind the eight ball for sure.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think that basically you've got to practice like the real test.
Sure.
Put yourself in a quiet room, like all that
Absolutely.
stuff. So yeah, I think that makes sense. Are there any other like prep mistakes or things that you see people do? Maybe not keeping an error log could count as a
Oh,
mistake.
sure. And that's, I definitely, with
Yeah.
my students, I have a template in Google Docs, and I ship it to them every time that they're getting ready to take a practice test, but because I want them to have a structure for that error log, for thinking in terms of, okay, let me retrace my steps. Why did I choose that? Because that's hard work in and of itself. Just trying to retrace those steps, and then thinking in terms of, okay, why is that choice not what ETS wants from me here? And then why exactly is that choice? Or, of course, because with the GRE, you have more than one, you have several questions, you have question types, and therefore several questions where more than one answer is required. So why are these the ones that work? And so, yeah,
Hmm.
forcing yourself to really think through, which goes to where what I was thinking when you were first asking the question, is just constantly testing, as important as taking practice tests are, as we discussed, too frequently testing without building your skills in between,
Hmm.
including making use of error logs to really think through what's working and what isn't.
Yeah. Great. I want to also maybe dig in on just like the specific sections, right? So let's talk about the quant first.
Sure.
What are some of the classic mistakes or traps that you see people falling for? Even people that are like good math students.
Well, sure. They're very good at including partial answers as answer choices, and it's very easy to get distracted by that if you're not writing everything out, if you're not using your scratch paper to help
Hmm.
yourself work things through and take the time to write down the actual answer before you look at the choices. So, to take a very simple example, if you're trying to find, I don't know, in the end they ask you for 3x plus 4, X will almost certainly be, whatever the value of X is, will almost certainly be one of the choices. And so that's
Hmm.
how they get us to fall for the traps. And the way around it is simply eliminating haste from your process. We I think too often those of us in test prep mistake we make is we simply say to students, slow down,
Hmm.
which as a general idea is yes, ultimately that's what you want to
Correct.
do.
Yeah.
But talking to students about what exactly that means, following the process, and what is that process. And I think students, because they know they're being timed, it's human nature, they want to get through it as quickly as possible. And the haste comes in, and then they fall for the traps. They rush through. It's again, it's just who we are. We're very
Hmm.
concerned we're going to run out of time. When the reality is, it's better to work. Perhaps if you need to, it's better to work fewer questions, but be just incredibly accurate on the ones you do work. So if you're left to guess on a few, you're still ending in a much better place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to ask the same question for verbal, right? I don't think there's maybe traps in verbal,
Not in
though
the
I guess
same
you could
way.
talk about like vocab.
Sure.
But yeah, maybe it's like vocab, maybe it's like talking about dealing with reading comp and pacing.
Hmm.
Yeah, what are the things to worry about with verbal?
Well, I think to a certain extent, just with the reading comp itself, although it's a smaller portion, it's an important part. Those questions in the middle, and if students don't recognize what's really being asked, and if they're looking for main idea, but the question really was asking you about what would best support a particular idea, that's just
Hmm.
failure to focus on the question at hand and then to approach it
Hmm.
accordingly. We talked about the vocabulary before. That's a common mistake students will make, is, like we said, just eliminating something without really considering entirely what's going on and just not predicting the answer ahead of time. That's how you avoid traps that might exist. It helps you to eliminate choices with greater focus, and again,
Hmm.
it provides a process that when we say slow down, it means take the time to identify the clue, to identify transition words that tell you whether you're going in the same direction as the clue or not, and then
Hmm.
make your prediction rather than rushing into the choices. And again,
Hmm.
human nature. We know the choices of where the money is. Ultimately, you must select the correct choice. But it's
Hmm.
about doing the work, laying the groundwork, whether it's on the math or the verbal, following the process through. So on the verbal side, it's predicting the answer ahead of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious then how much of it feels like so much of like your advice so far has been like don't rush,
Yes.
pace
Yes.
yourself, time management. How do you recommend that people practice that and get better at that as they're getting close to the test today?
Well, and that's where I think it comes down to, working on exercises. I think that you look at the precious few official questions, although, we talk about, a resource like Achievable, you look at some of the other preparation materials that may be out there, but ultimately incorporating official ETS materials are important as well. And so using their books, even though it's an online exam and the bulk of your preparation should be online, their books will be very helpful. And after you work through those exercises, then applying them to the practice tests, that's how you create the muscle memory in terms of using the time efficiently.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that I think makes a ton of sense. And really, it just comes down to practice. Are
Sure.
there any other prep habits or mistakes with prep that you would want to just call out while we're talking about it? Cramming or other things
Well,
like that?
cramming for sure. We talked about having a runway of 2-3 months in a previous meeting we had. In terms of prep, you want to give yourself time to do it, and at that point, if you've been doing that prep, cramming the night or two before the test, no, don't do that to yourself. You'll drive your anxiety levels up to a place that will be unhelpful, to say the least. And if you haven't been doing all that prep, well, these are not the kinds of exams that you can cram for. So that for sure. In terms of the prep leading into it, although, healthy eating habits, healthy sleeping habits are always a good idea, especially in the week leading into the exam. Being on a regular sleep schedule, making sure you're eating breakfast, doing all these things. And you can consider that a form of cramming, if you will. But even then, not just the night or two before. The body clock's a real thing. You need to give yourself a good week to set the pattern so that it's not a shock to your system on test day.
Yeah. And like, really, it should be more than a week.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's a good idea always, but, we know very well that for a lot of people, especially if it's not someone later in life, someone in college, they may be keeping very, very different hours. Although, of course, for the GRE, we'll see people who are making changes later in life and now are coming back to graduate school. But
Mhm.
yeah, ideally, yes, more than a week at a time, but at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Jeff Eisenberg from Long Island Test Prep. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free at achievable.me.